Good afternoon, I hope you're having an absolutely fantastic day. My name is Tom, I am a full-time composer and producer living and working in Cardiff, and about a year ago, the Midnights released all of the stems to their latest album, Monsters. An incredibly transparent and generous thing to do by anyone's standards, but this was also coinciding with a remix competition that they were putting on. This is the second remix competition that they put on, the second one that I've taken part in, and I was fortunate enough to have been selected as one of the sort of winners or finalists of this remix competition that was live streamed. There was only one full winner, Droid Bishop, who got his commercially released and whatnot. It was an amazing opportunity. I was so grateful to be able to take part and so grateful for all of the kind words that I've received since the remix came out. So thanks to the Midnight and their team for making it possible in the first place, and thank you to you for listening to the original remix. Now, if you haven't heard it yet, there'll be a link somewhere up there as well as down in the description where you can listen to the full remix that I made. Now, I decided to remix one of my favorite tracks off of that record, Dance with Somebody, and I thought that today I would go through that project and show you how I did it, the choices that I made, and what it all sort of sounds like. Let's just jump into it. This is how I remixed the Midnight's Dance with Somebody. So this is the production file for my remix. There's not loads and loads going on. As you can see at the bottom here, these are basically all of the actual stems. So when I started the project, I just imported all of the stems and then wanted to go through taking out the specific bits that I wanted and the bits that I didn't. It's very disorganized. I've spent a bit of time this morning trying to get it more organized and relabeling things, but it was not my finest work in terms of organized production file. But as a quick overview, we've got atmospheres and sort of incidental bits of music up here. Then we've got all of the strings that I used, a bunch of additional atmospheric things and textures, as well as the piano section there. Come down here, we've got all of the electric guitar that I did there. Underneath that, there's like a synth lead, my basses. Then we get to the percussion, a few layers of percussion around here. We've got a few sort of loops and sounds that I created myself down here. Rises and sub-hits underneath that. And then we've got the actual drum kit that I used here. After which we get to the samples that I took from the stems of the original track. Now, one of the things that I always try to do whenever I've done any remix, I say that as if I remix things all the time. I think I've remixed 2 tracks in my life, but I always want to make sure that there's a reason that I'm remixing something. You know, I'm doing it because I think that I could inject some of my own musical ideas and my own musical nuances into something that already exists. I see absolutely no sense in remixes where it's basically just a sort of carbon copy of the original track with maybe a couple of different synth sounds here and there. I just wanted to see what I could do with their material and if I could kind of sculpt my own musical landscapes around that pre-existing stuff. So as you can see, I didn't use very much from the stems at all. Primarily, the only thing that I definitely was going to use was the vocal. But as with the River of Darkness remix that I also did with them, which I'll link below as well, I like to move things around and not have the exact same structure of the track, as well as taking into account having different sonics. That's what I think a good remix should be, is something that doesn't sound like an alternative version of the original track. A good remix, I think, is something that could sort of stand alone as its own work. We'll start at the top. I like my textures, I like my ambiences. I primarily write neoclassical and ambient music myself, so I knew that that was how I was going to start. So I basically just started off with these really subtle piano atmospheres, which I have sent to bus 1, which is just a standard black hole reverb instance. And like I said in a previous production video, I EQ a load of stuff out of the reverb. One thing to mention very quickly actually is that this is like a year old, so I didn't have a lot of the plugins and things that I use now, and I don't really like it anymore because you're always kind of progressing when it comes to things like mixing and production. So listening to this is a bit cringe for me because I think that there's lots of stuff that I could make a lot better and do a lot better now in terms of the mix. So this isn't FabFilter Pro Q3, which is a shame. The next things I added in again, just to kind of give it this sort of dreamy vibe with these synth beeps. These are coming from the Olaf Ronald Stratus library. It's a very kind of specific sounds that it's got, and it does it really, really well. Try to be careful these days not to overuse it because it's a quite popular library. Now, again, just some really simple EQ and motion on it. I like with atmospheres to use things like Brow Motion or the Sound Toys Pan Man plugin just to help spread things out, because if it's not a primary instrument, I don't always want it to be taking up space in that main portion of the mix. Bit of Echo Boy. Best delay that you could ever really want. So it floats around a little bit at the beginning, and then I added a couple of reverses in from the original samples. It's good to add reverses here and there just to add some sonic interest to what you're doing. So I have this pad, and this one here as well. So there's the first two little bits of the stems that I used, and then we just get straight into the vocals. Now with the vocals, because of the style of music that the Midnight make versus the style of music that I make, I wanted to soften them down a bit. So I added these EQs onto it, like incredibly subtle. I mean, that's basically doing nothing at all. But this here, again, certain frequencies that I just knew I needed to tame down, and effectively like removing loads of the sizzly top end from it, because certainly in the early stages of the track, I just knew that it wouldn't really fit. I also de-essed the vocal a little bit as well. I think I just slapped this thing on there with the default settings, again, just to like calm down sibilance. I probably didn't need to, because I mean, the stems were processed, so it was coming from them. They probably did all of this themselves. But again, it's just about like sculpting something so it fits in with my style of music. So this is the vocal. Friend of mine. But without any of that, it just sounds like this. Take off your armor, friend of mine. And I've also got it being sent here to Echo Boy and Valhalla Vintage Verb. So one thing I do a lot is automate how much something is being sent to an auxiliary. This way you can achieve things like reverb and delay throws. So if you just want there to be like a reverb fade out from the last word of something, you just automate the amount that it's being sent to that bus. So here's the first instance of it. But I got time. Oh, yes. Yeah, that little bit of echo that just kind of gives it a bit more life. Here's a much more obvious example of it. It's Friday night. And again here. Some dance partners need a dance partner too. So that is obviously accompanied by the piano, which is the first sort of main instrument that I brought in. And I wanted to keep things simple, so it's just doing really basic chords. And then it gets a bit more rhythmic. I love doing that. If you listen to enough of my own stuff, you probably hear that kind of thing all the time. So yeah, let's hear how that develops. The rest of us don't have the blues, just that some dance partners need a dance partner too. Oh, another thing I did to the vocals here, Little Altar Boy, editing things like pitch and formants, is how loads of artists get that kind of weird thing with vocals where they sort of sound almost robotic but kind of flow in and out. So it's nice to like double that on top of or underneath an existing vocal. So and I put it there because I can remember thinking when I first heard the song how great that line was and how well it fit into the track. Some dance partners need a dance partner too, and it's just kind of sad, isn't it? So I wanted to emphasize that, and that's another thing, is that when you're emphasizing specific lines, there's got to be a reason for it. It's just that some dance partners need a dance partner too. Is that you? And in that section as well, it's the first time I introduced the strings, very, very subtly, just playing a bit of a swell. Really subtle, really smooth. I use flautando patches on all of them, and as you can see here, that's my modulation. What I do when I'm programming strings, because it's something I have to do a lot, whether it's for like media composition or for my own artist material, I'll get the notes in first, and then afterwards I'll go over it. There's a little ribbon for expression on my keyboard here, and I'll just let it play, moving that up and down. And if you do that across each instrument, then that's how you achieve these really nice natural sounding swells. Just make sure that each one is done independently. And I just liked having this subtle sort of expansion of sounds going on in the background. Here, it's all happening sort of in the sides. So let's get into the next sort of section, because I feel like the track is divided into about 4 or 5 different sections. You've got the initial sort of ambient and introductory section. You've then got a sort of slightly more neoclassical section. And then you've got kind of like lo-fi beats, hip-hoppy beats going on. Not that I'm particularly good at doing that kind of stuff. And then you've got more sort of an expansive build, and it goes into the kind of guitar-y, rocky section, and then it gets sort of full bit of everything at the end. The beat that was introduced is made up of a variety of different things. So I've got some instances here of battery, which is a Native Instruments drum machine, basically. So the kick is made up of 2 different layers. We've got the sort of subby part of the kick here. And then an additional layer on top of that that gives it a sort of bite, but also has that sort of lo-fi vibe to it. It's got like a sort of vinyl crackle on it as well. So together. And then the snare is, again, 2 layers. One of them is just a standard 808 snare. And then this, oh, there are 2 different ones in there. What do they sound like? Yeah, so various different types of snare sort of layered together. A few little percussive reverses going into things. So that's a reversed kick, and that's just a little reversed hi-hat. It's how you get that sort of low whoosh into things. Just reverse a kick. And then that layered with this. What's this? I think that's a shaker. Yeah, it's a shaker that, again, I just gave it a bit of motion here. Subtly, the mix is only at 28%. And then 1 knob pumper, because I'm too lazy to sidechain everything. And then we've got a variety of different loops, Foley sounds, shakers, and ride cymbals that I've got some nice swells from. All of these will have different bits of processing put on them, but then when everything's added together, and then there's also an 808, which is what I use just for the foundation of the bass for the whole of the first section. And what I've done here is add a bit of subtle side chaining to the 808 so that the kick can kind of come through properly. I think that's what I did anyway. And then the percussion later on is added to with some sort of trap hi-hats. So you can see that pattern there. It's just a variety of different sounds, and I just like to play them in on the keyboard as I sort of can hear them in my head, and then go through them all, editing velocities and timings and just really tightening it all up. So by itself, they just are super simple. But with all of the percussion, because a lot of it has been sort of softened, especially with like the sort of Foley loops, that has like a more gentle tone. And it's really nice adding like trap hi-hats on top because they just cut through so easily. Let's it's just about adding that additional layer of interest and development as things progress. Now in this first sort of instrumental beat section, I knew that I wanted to add in some instrument that was a bit unconventional. I like doing that, just chucking random things in there that don't necessarily fit. And so I decided to put an Armenian duduk in, playing that super silky, smooth little melody that only really happens once. Hans Zimmer would have liked that. Tiny little bit of automation there, just because you want to make sure that every note is audible properly, because without that, you lose a little bit of it. And then after that, I wanted to really introduce a degree of my sort of neoclassical and media composition influences. A big string moment, basically. So that's where we get strings that aren't just the flautandos that we'd been hearing before, have some ensemble patches as well as some solo strings. And I've said this before, but yeah, layer different string libraries on top of each other if you want to get like a really nice expansive sound. Bit messy, isn't it? Bloody hell. But I wanted loads of stuff to cut off really quickly there because we immediately get back into a proper beat with everything, and so I didn't want it to feel like there was a huge tail to the strings. Another thing that I did, which happens throughout the track down here to the vocals, is I automated the formants on Little Altar Boy for this. So that's the volume automation there, but you see the Little Altar Boy formant. So it's going up and down, up and down. Yeah, Little Altar Boy is basically just how you get vocals to sound like that. Now let's get into the next section, which was the sort of big build that I did. Now at this point, I used more of the stems from the original track. So the stems that I used just sound together like this. Basically just repeats like that. I really liked that pad, and I didn't want to mess around too much with trying to recreate that sound on anything because they've made the sound really good. And this is also the section where I first start introducing guitars into things. So my electric guitar section is here. What I really like doing is just super rhythmic plucky things. So that guitar is there, but as you could hear, it's sort of fading down. Before we get into the next big build, this is where I introduce the choir. No, it's not where I introduced the choir. I got that wrong. I really like country music. I was in Nashville a few years ago and it basically changed my life. So I like tracking lap steels into things, just doing little simple bends. And then there's this one. Again, it's just about putting in instruments that you like and that you think can enhance things. So a little bend introducing the guitars. Now at this point, I do start introducing the choir into things, as well as string swells coming in again, starting off slowly, but then building gradually as the track sort of progresses. Now the choir was incredibly difficult to program because I used a sample library, I think it was called Genesis Choir, and they were singing these Latin phrases, but I just, for the life of me, couldn't get it to be properly in time. So I basically had to bounce each individual one and then put them all in here, going through each one because they're around robins and things like that. So they're not going to be the same each time, just getting things lined up so the timing worked. And it's still not perfect, but it's the best I could do with the time frame I had to do the remix. So the choir start off just doing the same thing, but then later on they develop and are actually doing more harmonies. All of that combined with the strings that start to swell in. Also, another one of the stems that I added in there is that sort of vocal hook that they had in the original track. Now at that point, I added in a real drum kit, and I wanted to do that for a couple of reasons. Firstly, I thought it would just be nice to have some continuity, because I think I did a very similar thing on my River of Darkness remix. And I just like adding real drums at certain points. I say real, it's Stephen Slate drums, I believe. Yeah, this is the drum kit that I used. With drum processing, it's hard to get it to sound good. I don't think that this sounds particularly good. Like I said earlier, I don't think any of this sounds great now because it was about a year ago that I did it. But the drums just by themselves sound like this. And I like doing kind of slightly intricate hi-hat stuff. And in this section, I also really went for it in terms of the guitars. So as well as those drums, we've got a multitude of different guitar parts. So we've got the same two from earlier, which sound like this. We've got this one. Got this one. And then underpinning that, I've just got some typical chugs going on. But I feel like adding all of those elements together is just quite nice. Especially when you add the drums into the mix, it just all sort of fits together really nicely. I should probably quickly just go over some of the things that I do when I program drums. So if I'm using a drum kit, first thing I want to do is make sure that there is a bus compressor, which I've got a 3A on there, which is an unusual choice. And 1176 is what I'd probably use these days. Parallel compression on the drums, as well as a room reverb. Kick and snare have got a lot of processing going on. So I like to use this, the Shep 73, which is just like a channel strip. So it's basically a Neve emulation. Smack attack, just to give things that extra bite. So if I just play the snare, so that's it without it. See how it just sort of helps it cut through that little bit more and just adds that bit of power. And then we've got all of the different overheads and room mics here. So those are the drums that obviously later on develop into a much more full. So we have this build-up that goes on here where the choir comes in. And then there's a drop with like a tape stop, and then we get this sort of rhythmic section. I wanted to sort of trick people a little bit into thinking that that was going to be like a huge drop, but it's not a huge drop. It just suddenly kind of tones down and you just got all of this nice guitar-y rock sort of stuff. And again, a bit more Little Altar Boy magic going on this vocal line, just to give it that sound. Now in that little break there is another example of one of the bits of the stem I used, which is just that classic 80s Big Tom hits. I just thought that that would be like a nice sort of nod in the direction of the original track. At that moment, I also add in what I would refer to as an Owl City synth. Now, a few of you may be aware that I'm a big fan of Owl City, or I don't know, maybe was a big fan of Owl City. This synth right here, if you're a big fan of Owl City, you'll know that this is a very Adam Young sort of synth line. And I just thought it sounded cool. I was just like, yeah, let's have even more of an obvious thing happening before we get the big moment. Now, the big climax. One of the things there that I did to really help it sound bigger is I added in some guitar power chords, basically. So there's a lot more guitar than I remembered doing for this. I remember when I opened the project earlier, I was like, bloody hell, I recorded a lot of guitar. And I actually recorded it as well. I was worried when I was opening this that this would be back in like an era of time where I was being more lazy and using like sample libraries for things too much instead of just recording myself playing it. So I've got two instances of panned left and right power chords. And then on top of that, I did use one sample library just to add this extra little bit of sort of sizzle. But that combines with the two power chords. And then that's the first section where I introduce a synth bass that isn't the 808. Now the 808 is there, but it's got this MS-20 square bass. Now that is a patch in Anna that I used, not my actual MS-20. I didn't record that for this. It doesn't sound very nice actually, does it? Bloody hell, this is such a crap remix. I still wanted like the subby bass to be from the 808, and that just adds a bit of extra rhythm on top. And there are also some strings in that section as well, just sort of soaring over the top, and I wanted that melody, just to be emphasized a bit more here. So everything together just sounds kind of huge, I think. Just remembered that I'm also maintaining noir there, just doing some big chords. And then to tail it all off in the ends, I wanted to introduce the saxophone again as like a nod to the original source material. So I had the sax solo come in here as everything is kind of dying out. And I also automated the EQ on it, so it just gradually fades out like that. again re-emphasizing like my favorite line. I wish that I'd done different things with the piano there. I think that what it's playing works quite nicely, but it's just way too crunchy and hard. I should have used a different piano. I wonder what that would sound like on a different piano, actually. I'm just going to experiment with this. Throw that down. I also think I should have spent more time getting that to sound more natural. It sounds a little bit robotic. It's much nicer, isn't it? Anyway, that basically brings us to the end of the remix. I'm just trying to think if there's anything that is like of note that I should have mentioned. Just check if I used any other stems here. I used that because that is really, really cool. That was just in the run up to the sort of rocky drop that happens. So yeah, like I said earlier, section 1 is sort of ambient, and then you've got a sort of lo-fi vibe here. And then more of a sort of trappy lo-fi vibe. Take off your armor, let down your head. And then like an interlude to introduce the build. Then the guitars come in. As with all of my stuff, I like to include rises and sub-hits where possible to just emphasize moments of impact. So I've got a whole bunch of them here. This one's Subby Downer, which is sounds like something you get at a rave. So that's one. This is a long riser that pumps a bit with the rhythm of everything and moves around. Again, brow motion I think I used on it. So that, I think, concludes the work that I did on the remix. Like I said, it was really, really good fun to do it, and I'm so grateful to the Midnight for putting on something like that, especially like the first one that they did, because it was right as the first lockdown was happening globally, and it was so nice to have something to focus on other than COVID-19 and like Warzone. If I've missed anything out, or if you have any questions about anything that I might have overlooked, let me know down in the comment section. I know that some people are more interested in how something is conceptualized and other people are more interested in like the exact settings you use for your plugins. But yeah, that's my remix of Dance With Somebody by The Midnight. If you're interested in hearing any of my actual artist work, then I release ambient and neoclassical music under the name Thomas James White. It's available on Spotify. Everywhere else there will be links in the description to all of that stuff, as well as my socials and my shop, where you can pick up copies of my debut EP Her and my debut album The Deep Blue on vinyl if that's your thing. Thank you again to The Midnight for putting on the competition, and it was amazing hearing so many brilliant other remixes and submissions and all of that. The live stream was so much fun to take part in, and just in case anyone from the Midnight's team is watching this, I don't suppose you could update me on when I can expect the signed vinyl that I was supposed to get for being a finalist. That'd be great, thanks. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. If you've enjoyed this video, feel free to give it a thumbs up, and if you want to, you can subscribe down there. I put out new videos every week this year talking about music industry, being a full-time composer and a media composer, as well as like production videos like this one and anything in between really. So yeah, if you're interested in that, please subscribe. Thank you again for watching. I really do hope that you've enjoyed this. Have an absolutely fantastic day, and I'll see you very soon.